Why are kids forced to eat? It's one thing to make a kid finish their meal. Kids are easily distractible, and will often become cranky once they remember they are still hungry later. What you are describing goes beyond that, and sounds like abuse. My 5-year-old takes 2 bites and says he's full. If I let him get up, he will literally walk to the sofa, sit down and say, "Daddy, I'm hungry." I don't force him to eat, but I will say he 100% needs some prodding and encouragement. If he actually seems not hungry, then I put his plate in the refrigerator. When he says he's hungry 5 minutes later and he asks for candy as a snack, I pull out his plate, show it to him and ask if he wants it heated up or not. He will usually crush the whole plate of food then. He can then have snack-type food. It's a little dance we play like 4 days a week. Edit. I will say my mom does have stories of her sitting at the table until bedtime because she wouldn't eat her sweet potatoes. That was a different time. I'm not sure people really do that anymore, besides in a TV show maybe. It's just a huge fight that you don't need to have over and over. Even if I did make my toddler sit there for a while longer, I wouldn't make him sit there without me sitting there as well with my plate still in front of me. To him then it's just still dinner time and not some punishment. Making dinner seem like a punishment is going to make every dinner so terrible for everyone. Urging a kid to finish a meal isn't quite the same thing as forcing them to sit for hours at a table. What you described is abuse. What you're describing is one extreme. The other extreme would often involve the kid sitting down to eat, taking a few bites, deciding they're no longer hungry, letting the remainder of a plate of food go to waste, and then half an hour later they're hungry again and maybe resorting to packaged snacks that aren't particularly nutritious. Neither extreme is ideal, but knowing exactly how far is best to go in encouraging them to keep eating a substantial portion of a proper meal, or training eating habits around regular mealtimes rather than continuous grazing, can be tricky. Kids should always be served a small meal and offered more if they ask. They should be taught they can ask for more. Forcing never ends well, for anyone. I grew up with that, and it was completely miserable. It didn't help that my mother's cooking could gag a buzzard. I told my wife that I would not do that, and if she wanted to do food drama, I would not support her in it. Our son grew up understanding that he's responsible for what he chooses to eat, and also understanding the health consequences of his choices. If I cook a healthy meal and my kids don't eat it, they will absolutely come back to the kitchen for a bunch of junk 30 minutes later. I don't spank them over dinner, but I highly try to persuade them into eating a balanced meal over junk. Kids don't make the best choices. Watching my sister raise her toddler and knowing what I was like as a kid, I can see how it progresses to this. It's not like it starts when the kid is a baby. So when does it start? At the toddler stage. My niece would rather play than eat. Strapping her into her high chair is dangerous because she will find some way to free herself, or she will cry the whole time and not eat anyway. Getting her to eat is such a struggle. I often see my mom, her grandma, chasing after her and with a spoonful of food, and then I watch her forcefully stuff it in her mouth. But if she doesn't eat during the day, she will wake up overnight and scream and cry because she's hungry. And she just wants milk. Imagine a 2-year-old who still only drinks milk. She won't get the nutrients she needs. But if she refuses to eat during the day because she wants to play, what can the parents do? I know that when I was younger I would wake my mom up at midnight 2 a.m. because I was hungry all the time because I also refused to eat. I just wanted to play all day. I joke that my niece and I have very similar personalities, but it's a common toddler problem. Parents get this way out of desperation. They feel helpless and afraid because their kid isn't eating. rather than seek help, or try other strategies like establishing a routine, making eating fun, or seeing if the kid has sensitivities. They get angry and try to force their way. Starving your kid is abuse after all. They think that anything that gets their kid to eat is more beneficial than harmful because at least the kid eats. In my case, being forced to eat led me to developing an eating disorder. Lol. I don't understand why no one answered the actual question you asked, so I will. I've been poor most of my life, so this still affects my answer to this. I see 3 consistent reasons that this happens. Child Protective Services will take a child away from their parents if they don't eat enough, which often refuses to take into consideration how much the kid actually wants to eat. Eating twice a day instead of 3 times because you aren't hungry can become unacceptable, especially for Black and brown families, when they know how easy it is for government agencies to misconstrue basic things. Parents are convinced that the child will get hungry later and/or is simply distracted by some outside force. Parents are concerned about the health of their child and don't see that they don't need to eat an adult-sized meal every 4 hours. The least interesting answer is that parents are on a power trip and like the feeling of control. But I see other options in real life now often than not. My parents and people who took care of me did that. They forced me to eat the whole plate of food. But I couldn't. So I got yelled at and said there's starving kids in Africa, but then one day I threw up all the food I was forced to eat, and then from there everyone is like, oh, just don't eat a lot. Eat what you can. Tears of joy. And then we get people with binge eating disorder, or other food relationship issues. What you described is abusive. In my house, we serve my kid tiny amounts and she generally does have to try foods and finish that first tiny serving. And then she can ask for more of anything she wants to eat. Why? Because otherwise she will skip the meal, wait 25 minutes, and then get cranky and start wailing for Bomba and 5 popsicles. I was raised to take what you want, but eat what you take, at the family table. Once we each learned that lesson, we were told that going back for seconds is always an option. Quote, seems like a much better way to address the situation to me. What you're describing was done to most of us 80s, 90s kids. The majority of us are not doing any of this to our children. I was raised this way. One time I refused to eat chicken noodle soup made with coconut milk and milk powder. I was made to sit at the table until bedtime. Next morning my mom tried to make me eat it for breakfast, then for supper, etc. until it went bad. I lost 5 pounds that week, but refused to eat it. I never forced my kids to eat. Try something new. A tiny sample. Yes. But if they didn't like what was served, they could eat a sandwich. You don't know the frustration of a parent who makes a dish that for months until 5 minutes before supper time was the kid's favorite. Now the kid informed them that he hates it, always hates it, and is now full. The child then is excused and wants ice cream because they are hungry. I've never forced my kids to eat like my parents have. But I also haven't made them mac and cheese because they suddenly don't like meatballs and spaghetti. Yeah, in our house it's never empty your plate, but eat a reasonable amount and at least try 1 bite of everything. It's a balance to make sure they eat enough that they are getting a decently healthy meal and not ending up filling up on junk food later on, and forcing them to eat when they are legitimately full. Depending on the meal, the day, their attitude, they may or may not eat a full plate. So I give my kids roughly the same amount of food every meal, being sure to include at least one thing I know they will eat. I want my kids to be able to eat anything, within reason, that is in front of them. They don't have to eat it all, but they have to be able to eat a sufficient amount. They won't always be able to have what they really want for dinner. So they need to learn to just eat stuff they may not be particularly fond of. Plus, you never know when you discover a new food you like or realize your taste preferences have changed, and you now like a food you didn't like before. If my kids don't want to eat a sufficient amount, that's fine. They just don't get anything else after dinner. If they aren't hungry enough to eat their dinner now, then they aren't hungry enough for dessert. In extreme instances, I'll just keep the plate aside, and if they get hungry later, they can have some of their dinner. I've only had to do that a couple times. There's also the edge case where okay, you can have something after dinner and other than dinner, but it has to be fruit or a veggie. I've never done that to my kids. I'm pretty good at assessing how much they can eat, so I give them appropriate sized portions. If they don't finish their food, that's fine. Food should never be a source of anxiety or a reason for conflict. Meals should be enjoyable. Everyone should leave the table happy and content. My husband has some trauma from repeatedly being denied food in his childhood and teen years. He was severely underweight and it stunted his growth. If our kids don't eat for whatever reason, he gets super anxious. It's a lot of hard, continuous work for him to prevent his anxiety from affecting the way he handles situations in which our kids don't eat enough. His anxiety shows as irritation and anger, but he listens to me as a voice of reason. Sometimes, I can't help but wonder how many people don't have that voice of reason and traumatize their own children, and when that cycle ends. My parents did this and it never worked. All it did was make me hate the food they tried to make me eat. I actually liked it when I got old, but that was when I wanted to try it. What they did only pushed me back further from trying it.
If you enjoyed this video, please check out our playlists full of similar content. Epicaricast is like doom scrolling for your ears. Please like, share, and subscribe.